Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Road to Recovery podcast. This podcast is a platform for education, discussion, and conversations on mental health. I'm your host, Amira Shah, and in this podcast, you'll get to know more about the therapeutic process, insight into life from the perspective of the psyche, and also join me in exploring current issues with other practitioners. I specialize in grief, but I'm always interested in learning about the human experience of the mind, heart, and spirit. So join me on this journey of in-depth learning about ourselves and the world we live in. Hi everyone, welcome back to Science of the Soul. So today I have with me a biblical counselor, Padre Chris Perona. He is a private practitioner. He practices at Foundation's Counselling Center here in Brisbane, and he sees clients online and face-to-face. Hi Chris, how are you today?
Hi, Mira. Very good, thanks. Very excited to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for doing this. We talked a little bit before we started recording about the things we can talk about and a little bit on psychotherapy, a little bit about grief, emotions, motivations, and Hebrew. So I don't know what will happen now while we speak, but can you tell us a little bit about your work and what it means to be a biblical counselor?
Sure. I think a biblical counselor is someone that essentially works with the frameworks that come from the Bible. So I do believe in God, and I believe that what we're taught from the Bible is that we're fundamentally created to live in a number of relationships with God, with each other, and with the world.
Mm.
And it is possible to live independently of God in terms of, even though he may have made some aspects of how he would like us to live very clear, people can choose not to live that way.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people come to struggle where they try and replace God with things that he made or aspects of creation that he has made. So we're meant to enjoy creation and aspects of our lives in harmony with God, not separately from God. So once we remove God from one of our primary ways of thinking or our focus, and we make our life all about perhaps even good things like our marriage or our friends or our career, if that is our whole life, it's missing our relationship with God, and that creates a dissonance or a tension. There can develop an emptiness or an agitation within us, because I think that we are created to live in harmony with God, with each other, and with creation. And so as a biblical counselor, I help people. Usually people come with something's broken in their lives. There's an aspect of their lives which is not working. And part of my pastoral, like as a shepherd with a sheep, as it's, using that metaphor, I try and walk along and with that person to help them explore how is that broken part connected to their relationship with God, with their neighbor, with other people, and the world. So it's a much more holistic approach. Rather than just focusing on what's broken, we begin to use that maybe as a beginning point, and then look at their whole relationship and their whole spirituality, and also like physical, their body as well, and all aspects of their lives, but from the framework of God each other world.
So this is your own personal framework in your mind when you're presented with a client's case.
Yeah, that's right. So I am a Presbyterian minister, and I've had 15 years of experience in the church as a minister. And part of my ministry was to do biblical counselling training.
I didn't get that.
Biblical counselling training. Siri, she's got to come into this apparently. So I did biblical counselling as with an organisation called Christian Counselling Education Foundation, which is in America. And I also received direct supervision with a couple of their staff members. So I practiced biblical counselling as a Presbyterian minister with people in my parish, and received supervision during that time, just as psychologists receive supervision. So I've had both postgrad master's level training in biblical counselling, so how to think in those frameworks that I've already described, and also receive supervision.
That's so cool. How long did it take you to complete your training?
Well, I haven't completed it all. So I've done the first 2 certificates.
Okay.
So each subject goes for 1 semester, and typically it's about 10 contact hours at least, plus reading. So it's a big commitment that was really hard to do while being a full-time minister. So I've done it over over that 15-year period. I've chipped away, and I've done the first two certificates of 3. So I have 1 more to go.
Wow. So what led you to this role?
Oh, wow. Okay. So,
Broad question.
so growing, yeah, great question. I'm going to have to do a little bit of family history now. So my mum's a practicing Roman Catholic, and my parents got divorced when I was in primary school, and that had a pretty significant impact on me growing up in a very negative way. I became a very toxic person, and I really lost my way. And I met a friend in year 11 at high school who was a Christian, and I gave him a real hard time because I didn't like God, because I thought God had really messed up my life. So I was pretty angry. And one day he challenged me to, if I was looking for the truth, read the Gospel of John in the New Testament. And so when I read the Gospel of John in the New Testament, I realized that Jesus, like, he was really different to how I expected. I thought church was just for middle class Christians that had their lives all together, not for street kids that were getting in trouble by the police, like blue light disco and all sorts of terrible things. But I won't go into that. And so I realized that, yeah, like Jesus wasn't some sort of, I used to refer, I remember going to church, and when I first started going to church, I still swore and everything. It was really funny. And I gave my testimony. I said, Jesus is a really cool dude. And half the church people nearly fell out of the pews. But yeah. So, but that hasn't changed. I'm still the same person. So I just felt that Jesus approached the disenfranchised, the people that were just rejected, the lowest of the lows. That's what really captured me about Jesus, was that he genuinely loved and cared for and approached people, like the untouchables, literally like the lepers, and he would embrace them. The immoral woman who washed his feet with her tears, and dried them with her hair, and just his compassion for her. He says, like, your sins are forgiven, and everyone else is outraged that he's doing that. And I realized, wow, and so one day in a bus, I was thinking, Jesus, I've stuffed my life up. I've lived it my way, and so I want you to be in charge from now on. So and then I just started to try to read the Bible and be a disciple. A disciple of Christ is someone who essentially just, what does Jesus teach, and how do I live according to his teaching, and how can I be more like Jesus in my own life? And it's really hard, but he does help, and he has helped me grow into who I am now. So this is turning into a very long answer. So I wanted to dedicate my life to Jesus as a disciple, and then I decided, well, I'll do a Bachelor of Theology and then decide where I go from there.
Oh, sweet.
So I did nursing, state enrolled nursing for a year, and worked a bit, and then did my BDH. And then I finished that in my early 20s, and then decided that I wasn't mature enough to be a church minister. So I did nursing for 9 more years, and then became a Presbyterian minister.
So you're a nurse?
Yeah, so I've done state enrolled nursing. Yeah, that's right.
Wow. I didn't expect that.
Well, you know why? One of the main reasons why I did nursing was I was a terrible person. Yeah, I was really horrible, really obnoxious. Like, my Christian friend said to me later on that he had to pray to Jesus to help him love me. I was that bad. I was really bad. And I thought, if I do nursing, maybe I'll actually be taught how to be compassionate towards people. That's how bad I was.
Wow. So it sounded like you grew up and you were quite disconnected from empathy and compassion. And then
Correct.
you tried to learn that by throwing yourself into the deep end by being a nurse.
Correct. Yeah, that was my thinking.
That's serious dedication.
Because seriously, nursing's really hard, because you're looking after people who are at their lowest and most vulnerable time in their life, where essentially all their choice, and like, they're in crisis essentially, because they're in hospital, and they can't sleep when they want, they can't eat when they want, they can't go where they want, like, and a lot of the things that are happening to their body medically, like procedures and things, they've got no choice over either. So it can bring out the best and the worst in people. And so I thought, if I can learn to look after people who their circumstances might be bringing out their worst in them, which is directed at me because I'm the closest person that's looking after them, then maybe I'll get to practice and become a better person.
Wow, that's really awesome. So you were a nurse for 9 years, and then you went...
Well, actually, sorry. So I was a nurse for 5 years, and then I got out and went into advertising.
Oh, what did you advertise?
Yeah, so I did an office admin course and got into graphic arts. And I ended up in this like big George Patterson Bates, or some, like, the biggest advertising company in the Southern Hemisphere, where we used to have Ansett brushes. It's not a very good omen. All of them are gone. But yeah, really big clients. I hated it. It was so corporate-y and I didn't fit in. But yeah, so yeah, I was in advertising for about 5 years.
Sounds like you've had a few lives.
I do, yes. I like a challenge.
And how did you become a minister then?
Yeah, so after my 5 years so I did my BDH while I was a nurse, and then went back to nursing, got out of nursing, got into advertising. So there's that 9-year gap from when I finished my BDH and then I had to start the process of becoming a minister. So yes, that was I didn't really actually want to become a minister.
Why?
God made me do it.
Oh, wow.
So in that 9 year, in that 9 year period, all these people kept saying, "Oh, have you thought about going into the ministry?" And I'd be like, "Yes, but no, I don't really want to," because I didn't ever think that I would fit or be a very good minister, just because of my character and disposition. I'm a nonconformist by nature, and I don't really like traditions, but yeah, I just felt that God was really calling me to become a minister. And as a disciple of Christ, I had a lot of people saying I would make a good minister and I should think about going into it. And I came to that conviction myself and did become a minister. And yeah, that all my fears came true. And I pretty much made a mess of my first church. And on reflection, I would say that fundamentally where I went wrong was I tried to be too strong. And I really wanted to succeed as a minister and, just as a person. And so I think I tried too hard. And I didn't allow myself to be kind of vulnerable and open to being corrected, or so I was quite arrogant, really. And I was very hard on my first church, which at the time they seemed to be the problem, but I recognize now that I was as much the problem as they were. So it was a very difficult time.
How'd you come back from that?
I think it took time. I had mentors who were supportive. I came up here to a church, Presbyterian church here in the Gut, and I was there for 10 years. And I think that was very positive ministry, and they gave me space to recover and find my feet, both for me and my family. And it took a lot of time, and it took a lot of grieving, I think, and self-reflection, and being a bit more honest with myself about where I'd gone wrong, and how I'd been hard on that first church.
So you had the opportunity to do some soul searching and professional development in this church at the Gap. And how did you end up being a biblical counselor? Like, how different is the role?
So I started biblical counselling way back right from the beginning. So for me, it might sound really weird, and I don't know how many people listening to this podcast will find it interesting, but I think that for me, the way, like when I write and preach a sermon, the way that I think about that is it's like counseling to the collective. And when I talk to someone in a counseling center, like one-on-one, I think of it as preaching to the one. Because for me, counseling and preaching and pastoral care is all the same thing. It's essentially applying the lesson of the Bible or a particular text in the Bible to a person's life.
Yeah.
So so another way of describing the same thing is, how can I help this person walk with Christ or be able to follow Christ in a clearer, practical way? So what does life with Christ look like? What difference will Christ make in this person's situation? And how will that play out differently? How will that change or help that person be a better person, essentially?
So people that come to you are Christians, typically.
I find that, so I find that people who come to Foundations Counselling Centre, which is through which I practice, I find that they do think of themselves as being Christian, but biblical counselling isn't as narrow as that, because I believe that we're created by God to live with God, with each other, and in the world. So I would say that God made us in his image. So there are qualities and aspects of us as human beings which reflect God. So whether a person believes in God or not, I find that I'm still able to help them, even though without necessarily using biblical terms or bringing Jesus into it. If I can help someone essentially become a better person within their own framework of thinking, then I'm happy. And I find that I can do that.
So you don't have to be explicit about biblical terms or refer to Jesus or God with your clients, but you use the Bible and your faith and your background to guide them nonetheless.
Sorry, my computer's just done something weird. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Can you just run through that question again? Sorry, I had a technological failure.
No, I was just summarizing what you were saying, as in you don't explicitly articulate or express,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've got my train of thought. Yes. Thank you. So the Ten Commandments are summarized, like Jesus said, the summary of the law is love God, love your neighbor. So in other words, I should treat you as I want you to treat me. Most people would agree with that. So if I can help a husband love his wife and his children better, I feel I can do that without necessarily referencing Jesus. So, for example, a historical forefather of the Protestant church, Martin Luther, he said, to be a Christian cobbler, to make shoes, you don't have to put a cross on the shoes that you're making. Just make good shoes.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. I'm making a mental note of it and drawing a shoe right now.
Oh, that's good.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Science of the Soul. This is a short interruption to let you know that if you or someone you know are in need of more support, you can find me at Road to Recovery on my Facebook page, my Instagram, or my website at aroadtorecovery.org. I hope you've enjoyed listening so far, and now let's get back to the podcast. So, earlier today, when we were speaking before we started recording, you showed me a book called The Question of Lay Analysis by Sigmund Freud. And you said that in the book, psychotherapists are considered secular pastors. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I enjoyed reading this book written by Sigmund Freud. He was arguing that in his day, psychotherapists, the body that was looking after this whole aspect of psychotherapy, they were saying that you had to be a medical doctor to practice psychotherapy or talking therapies. And so he argued against that. And he liked this idea of, he thought of himself as a secular pastor, someone that would walk alongside a person, get to know that person, and try to get to, I guess, the root or the core of their problem, rather than looking at symptoms and trying to diagnose a solution or like we have, prescribed medicine or prescribe something that will fix it. I think what I appreciate about Freud is he he did understand that that the human heart was quite a deep and dark place, and that a lot of our problems do come from that place. And I think he didn't want to get sidetracked with symptoms and try to fix those symptoms. He wanted to get to the heart of the issue. Now, I don't necessarily agree with how, like, some of his theories, but I really do appreciate that he understood. And some of us would say that he had a pretty dark, depressing view of humanity, but I don't think he's far off. We are pretty dark. We can be very dark. You don't have to look very far to, I mean, you look at the rate of domestic violence in Australia, for example.
Yeah.
It's really disheartening to find that two people that fell in love, hopefully they did, that's why they're together, could get to a place where, wow, they're treating each other so badly. So,
yeah, I think that happened behind closed doors. And I guess one thing I do appreciate about being in Australia is that we are, well, this country is very open and very vocal about this, about DV assistance and DV crisis. There's so much support here, and there's so much education. I think the education around violence can, stretch further. There is a lot more we can do. But it's definitely a lot more than where I'm from, where these things are just phenomenally taboo and stigmatized, and sometimes even thought of as something that they would deserve because they have sinned. And so the abuse or the violence that they're receiving is, it's their fault. I'm sure there's a lot of
justified.
Yeah, there's a lot of gaslighting happening there as well. But that's a really deep topic, which maybe it's not for today.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
But what you talked about how Sigmund Freud recognizes and acknowledges that the human being is, it's complex, and how in psychotherapy we kind of walk with the client to somehow vicariously experience what they're experiencing with a fresh lens, but not objectify them as a subject that has problems. We're not trying to pathologize. We have a lot of respect for the human being, the person. And likewise, everyone has their blind spots. That's why therapists also have their own supervisors and such. So acknowledging that there's always wisdom that we can't see. That's somehow, somewhere. And it always helps when someone is there with you to look at whatever it is that you want to improve, but also, help you think outside the box. Like, have you thought about that? What does that person think about, how is this person affected? It gives a larger picture, an appreciation of a larger picture for the person seeking assistance, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for me, part of my role as a biblical counselor is I often find that people will have come to a place in their lives and their thinking and their feeling towards God that I work towards helping to rectify. So they may have come to think that God is disappointed in them or judging them or punishing them or disciplining them, or has certain expectations of them, which I don't actually think is true. And so part of my walk with people is to explore that, is to explore that they may not have the right picture of God and how God actually sees them. Because I've found in my relationship with God that he has been more faithful to me than I have been faithful to him.
What do you mean faithful?
I think that what we don't really appreciate about God is that he's very he's grounded, he's very stable in his love. Like his love doesn't depend on me, my love to him. His love is so constant. And so his love is faithful to me even when I stray away from him or disappoint him or deliberately break. Like even within myself, like I disappoint myself. Like I have codes of conduct for my own self, and then I'll think back and like, did I just do that or say that? I can't believe I did that. I'm even disappointing my own standards, let alone God's. And yet I find that God he does move towards me with compassion and understanding. There's some fantastic what we call psalms in the Old Testament. They're poems, they're prayers, they're songs that the Israelites sang and do sing. And there's this one psalm in particular, Psalm 77, that I've lived out of for a long time. And Psalm 77, like, you would be really surprised that it's even in the Bible, because there are a couple of verses. I can read them for you. He says, so he says things like, so he says, I remembered God. And you're thinking, oh, good, he's remembering God, he's going to feel encouraged. But he says, I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. And he says of God, you hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. And then he says, will the Lord cast off forever? And will he be favorable no more? Has his mercies ceased forever? Has his promise failed forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? It's like, this is in the Bible. I can say this.
Yeah. I
can pray this. This is how I feel. It captures. So when we talked about my first church and how it went terribly wrong, you asked me how I got through it. This Psalm 77 is one of the reasons why I got through it, because it tells me that God gives me the space to express my own doubt in him, because my circumstances were felt crushing.
Yeah.
And so I was able to, this Psalm helped me cry out to God. Sometimes I like to think of it as like bleeding Godwards, and I know that we spoke a little bit about grief before we started recording, but I just want to throw this thought out to you, and I'd like to see what you think about this. Okay. I actually believe that grieving in a Godward way, like this psalm, is an act of worship. So we often think of worship, you think of people in a church, or you think of like Muslims praying, the 5 times when they pray their prayer. You think of worship, a lot of praise. Yeah, absolutely, praise. It's connected with joy or duty, commitment. But we can hurt Godwards. Like if we're hurting in God's direction, then it's good. And that, as a biblical counselor, sometimes that's what I try to help people realize, that rather than going around their grief, under it or over it or ignoring it, there is a way through it. And they don't have to do it on their own. Jesus can help them. I mean, Jesus was called a man of sorrows.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's how he was described. And I think that these prayers, songs, these psalms certainly help me understand that God's faithfulness is more faithful than my faithfulness or unfaithfulness.
That's what it means. So getting through the grief by embrace is, in a way, through the Psalms, would be embracing the grief, acknowledging it. You know, the reason why it's there is probably because it's acknowledging the fact that, you know, doubt and misery is part of the human condition, it's part of the human mind and emotion. It happens from time to time. It can happen from time to time. And to get through that grief, you don't have to do it alone, because Jesus is the man of sorrows, and he will walk that path with you. And it might be awful, it might take a really long time, but you're not alone. So there's a sense of accompaniment and almost like camaraderie, like, you know, you don't have to do this on your own. Have some faith, because we know, well, you know, God knows, Jesus knows. We know that this is part of being human, and that's why the song is there. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you don't mind, maybe some people listening to the podcast, this is a question that I've been asked quite a few times, is, you know, if God is good, then why does he allow such significant suffering in the world? And it's a fantastic question, and I can't answer that question. Having just posed it, I don't want to be so trite as to say that somehow, you know, Chris has got the answer to suffering. But one of the ways that I like to think about that question or that issue is that the world isn't finished. Like, God created it and it was good. And then humanity broke it and introduced evil and death into it. And since that time, God has put a plan in place. And Jesus is the center of that plan, that he lived a good and righteous, obedient life to his heavenly Father. He died an unjust death on our behalf to take upon the punishment that I should bear upon himself. And he died. And then he conquered death and rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. And so what we experience at the moment is not the finished product. So as a Christian and someone that tries to live as a disciple of Christ, I'm looking forward to when one day Jesus will return and execute both healing and justice. So he'll bring healing to the broken and justice as well. So it's not the end. And so I know that you're interested in philosophy and the deeper issues of life. And so I think one of the aspects of mental health that in the Western world, people struggle, like people who are secular in their thinking. So they don't like the idea of a God or a higher being in their lives. And I respect that. I'm not denigrating that. But if you don't have a bigger narrative that you fit into, then your suffering and your pain, what does it mean?
Yeah.
And it's just pain. it has no meaning or purpose.
Right.
And so it's your problem and your problem alone. And I find that really isolating. And where do you get your sense of hope outside of yourself? Where the world religions, part of their existence is about trying to understand evil and suffering in the world, whether it's Buddhism or the Islamic faith or Christian faith or Hindu. It gives a context in which we understand ourselves and understand our experience both of pleasure and pain. But without that, then you're on your own and it has no significance at all. So I find that hard. I find that would be a real struggle for me if I didn't have that framework where, look, I can't explain suffering specifically. I don't understand why it's happening in my life in this way, but I have an overall hope that somehow it will get sorted.
Yeah.
And I look to God to help me hurt in a way that is good, or God would. And yeah, so I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I really enjoyed that train of thought. In terms of suffering, I think it's necessary to an extent to have some sort of framework or understanding of how the world works, and in terms of giving us hope, things like the Judgment Day, or when Jesus returns, like that gives hope to the helpless of the helpless of the hopeless of within us. And hope is one thing that people hold on to, it's one thing that stops you from offing yourself. And when you, like what you described, that really sterile mentality of the lack of meaning and purpose. And maybe I'll share this as well. When I was working in university, I was a counselor for the university students for a brief period of time. And I kind of got worn out as a counselor, because a lot of the cases that was presented to me, or that presented, was around that. It was an existential crisis, this dark dread, meaninglessness of going through the motions but not knowing what it's about, and then this depression and anxiety, which I think is existential, because if everything is black and white, and you eat, you sleep, you wake up, you exercise, you go to school and all that, if there's no reason why you're doing any of these things, if there's no passion, there's no hope, there's no greater purpose, then you might find yourself going down that path. And I think I think it's normal that we go down that path from time to time, when things get really rough. And I'm not sure, have you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, you have to read it.
Okay.
It's big. It's you can read it in like a day or two, but it's pretty powerful.
Okay.
He's a psychiatrist that was in the concentration camps, and he lost his whole family, his wife and everyone. And he wrote about what he kept writing in there. He hid his work, but he wrote about what kept him going, what was the meaning of life. And then he came out and became this profound psychotherapist. But in terms of suffering, I think that suffering on a personal level is necessary for growth, and also on a macro level it's necessary for growth. Like if you see post-traumatic stress disorder like PTSD, that is one way that somebody can respond to it's like it's a choice, sorry. One way that somebody responds to trauma is to have PTSD, or post-traumatic symptoms, which might, go on for a while, but then it might subside, or, and then when it does subside, there's post-traumatic growth, and that only happens through suffering. So I think that just the idea of suffering itself is, there's some element of growth and some lessons that we have to learn, because sometimes we make the same sort of mistakes and we just don't know why this keeps happening to us. Or like, for example, why we keep getting into abusive relationships, or why we can't like stop, I don't know, binge eating or something like that. We have not learned that lesson, and so we suffering from the consequences. But then when it comes to like unnecessary suffering with like evil, I think that's what you were talking about. That's when, justice and hope is something that you just, otherwise you lose hope in humanity. But I wanted to ask you, what is your understanding of yin and yang? Can only goodness in the world survive or exist? Is that possible without, some chaos?
Okay, so well, I don't really hold to a yin and yang, because a yin and yang is the idea of like an equal, like the equality of both good and bad, or good and evil. There's a sort of like an equality between those two ideas. I believe that God is infinite and God is love. And evil is something that came about through essentially someone that God created, like a creature. So there isn't like that kind of equality between good and evil. I think that so my frame of, like, I think that when you do bad things or evil things or wrong things, or when you break the commandments, there are consequences. So you could see that as type, like karma type of idea. I understand that, but I don't hold to the idea of yin and yang and karma, because I think grace, U2, Bono wrote a fantastic song called Grace. And he talks about, in that song, grace operating outside of karma, that grace is so much richer and deeper. God's love is so much more powerful, I think, than the evil in the world. And there's this wonderful verse in the Bible where essentially God promises to use everything for my good. Like even so if you think about the death and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, which is probably the worst act of evil in all the world, the Bible describes that in that way, but at the same time that it was actually something that God planned. And so God is able to use the worst act for the greatest good. So there's not equality between good and evil. Good far outweighs evil, in my mind and my belief system. And that gives me a lot of hope, because it's not a struggle between equal forces.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
The victory has already been won.
Right.
It's just that we're waiting for, we're yet to catch up to that.
So we skipped ahead somehow. But when you said the word victory, what that implies that there was a conflict. What was that
Absolutely
that you're referring to?
So yeah, absolutely. So one of the categories that, as a biblical counselor, one of the categories that I think in terms, and sometimes we'll discuss with someone that I'm walking with, is a kingdom category. So mostly in the Western world, in secular world, it's all the medical model. You have an illness, you have a prognosis, and then you have, a prescription to get better. But one of the biblical categories is kingdoms. And so there's the kingdom of light and there's the kingdom of darkness. And so there's a conflict that's being waged. And it's essentially a conflict that is about winning people's hearts. Where, are they in God's kingdom, or are they in the kingdom of darkness? And so that's the major conflict that the Bible talks about. Mm-hmm. And that conflict was resolved when Christ died and rose from the dead, so that anyone who believes in him is transferred out of the kingdom of darkness into God's kingdom of light by faith, not by what they do, but by grace, so that no one can boast. So that conflict, so I am judged not guilty, even though I am guilty and I deserve punishment, because Christ has taken my guilt on himself and paid the penalty. And then he gives me his good works that I'm unable to do for myself. So it's like I'm in debt. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
you go.
So sorry. Who came up with that arrangement? How did it come about that with Christ's death, everyone else's sins from then on till forever after is being atoned? Because he's coming back anyways. So
yes, that's right.
Happen. Sorry, this is like a non-Christian question that's posed by a non-Christian.
It's all right. So it was always God's plan. So I think the whole Bible story in a nutshell is God created mankind and the world, and it was good. And then they rebelled against God because they wanted to make their own decisions. They wanted to live how they wanted to live. They wanted to live autonomously and independently of God. They wanted to make their own choices. They wanted to be free. It sounds familiar, right? And so once they did that, they were cast out of God's physical presence. And God instituted a plan. He promised that one day someone would come and overcome evil once and for all for mankind. And so the whole of the Old Testament, so you've got the people and they're always falling away from God and falling away from him and breaking his commandments. And there are references in the Old Testament where it gets to a point where there's a reference that talks about how our hearts are like stone, and God's going to have to give us hearts of flesh. And then when we come into the New Testament, Jesus has this encounter with a religious leader, and they have this really long discussion. And Jesus explains that to enter the kingdom of God, the kingdom of light, you have to be born again spiritually. And this is like really blows this religious leader's mind. It's in John 4. And Jesus explains that it's a spiritual rebirth that has to happen. God has to do this. Otherwise, we've got these stony hearts that are never going to want to love God or love our neighbor as the way we're created to be and do. And so Christ comes and lives the life in a way that we don't live. Like he never broke one of God's commandments. He kept all of the commandments. And so the wages of sin is death. That's a quote from the Bible. So in other words, if you break the commandment, you're going to die. Jesus didn't break the commandments. So he could have chosen to live forever.
Okay.
But because he died an innocent person so that we can get to heaven.
Okay. And in order to do that, you have to alliance yourself with Christ by believing.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. So in putting my faith in him, That's how I am saved. So to think of it this way, a lot of world religions, to get to their God or to get to their nirvana or heaven, however you want to phrase that, you have to work towards that. You have to follow steps, you have to keep rules, you have to become a certain person.
Yeah.
The difference with the Protestant faith, Christian faith, is that I'm saved for good works. I don't do good works to be saved. I do good works because I am saved, because I want to, because I've had that inner change. I've been born again inside myself, a spiritual renewal. And so that I would say that what propels me in my life is the love of Christ. Because of the love of Christ, I have grown to love my neighbor.
You know, for the first time in my life, I've asked this question so many times. This is the first time I got it. Like, I understood. Like, and I've asked this question so many times. You have no idea.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. That's awesome.
So and like, say, maybe, you know, the majority of us, we are motivated to do something positive, something good. Sometimes our intentions are fraught with other selfish gains. Like, for example, I never really could, even as a child, reconcile the idea that I'm doing this good thing because my parents said that I'll get a sadaqah or a blessing or reward in Jannah, in heaven. So it's like I have, you know, a bank account, and I'm just like, why can't I just do this because I just want to do this, you know, out of compassion, out of empathy or interest or curiosity, whatever. But they're always like, you know, going to school, going to, you know, traveling to learn something, you get a reward for every step. I'm just like, why are people counting rewards? I don't get it. Like, shouldn't you be doing good for the sake of doing good? So whenever I hear something like that, I mean, maybe there's a deeper, you know, philosophical understanding that I'm completely missing. But as from a child till now, I never really understood that. And I acknowledge the fact that you said our intentions, our good intentions of altruism or whatnot, are sometimes fraught with something else, which we can't always control. So it makes a lot of sense that now that if you are, you know, a blank slate, the whole tabula rasa thing spiritually, you have the choice to do all the good things you want to do and the bad things too, but the bad things won't be credited to you as something that you will have to
exactly
pay out.
Yep. So I don't have any fear at all.
How freeing.
About
That's
my
a very liberating concept.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in so far. As you can probably tell, Padre Chris Perona and myself, we are both extremely engaged in these topics. So as you know, you can't really anticipate how a conversation will unfurl. But if you're keen to keep listening, please tune into the next episode for part 2.